Set to go? And so this is the first time we've also engaged a Dharma talk like this, and I noticed that because of the way my computer is taking this in and the larger screen, it looks like I'm looking up all the time for you guys that are not here, so I apologize for that. And also, when you're just teaching on Zoom, you're directed exactly at the screen, but when we're in person, you're moving around, you know, and it seems like you're disregarding the people on the screen. So it's a very interesting thing. So I make my apologies straight away for those of you that are remote. It will be better for me if I sort of relax into speaking here and realizing that it may seem as if I'm disregarding you in some ways, but I definitely am not. Who was on the sort of practice committee that put this whole thing together? Raise your hand if you're. So there are several people here, and so I know a lot of people participated in determining the theme, and the title that we had landed on was clarifying the call to practice on the great matter of birth and death. So if you didn't realize that's what the teachings were about, that's what they are. Clarifying the call to practice. If you look on your chant sheets, the first thing is the call to practice, which is the verse that's on the Han, the percussion instrument that calls people. It's the very first thing on the first page, on the left-hand side. And it's listed here 3 times. Let's say it together just one time, okay? Great is the matter of birth and death. All is impermanent, quickly passing. Awake, awake, don't waste this life. And you can see on the last one it says, don't waste this rare and precious life. When I was training at Tassajara, there was a Han in the long, low valley of Tassajara, which is called the Echo Han, because the valley is long enough that the Han at the Zendo, you couldn't hear it all the way for the lowly beginning monks who were way off, you know. And so there was one in the middle, and if you were the person in charge of the Echo Han, you would listen to the one at the Zendo, and when the sequence came, you would echo it, and it would be passed down. And on that Han, Norman Fisher had written another translation. It said, birth and death are serious. Everything changes. Wake up. Don't squander your life. Like, boom. It's kind of punchy. Which is a great translation. And then on the great matter of birth and death, I always do this for every retreat. I will reread the description that supposedly got you here, instead of just, I wanted to be with all my friends and hear Flint or whatever. What is Zen practice? What is its motivation? What is its direction? Why practice? What can this practice offer in a fragmented and fractured world? Traditionally, the striking of the wooden board with a mallet that signals that Zazen is about to start. It's sharp and a definitive sound, while still warm and inviting. It calls the Sangha to practice together. That's what the Han does. The wooden sounding board, called the Han, is inscribed with these words, and this is what you just chanted. In this experiential retreat, we'll explore the meaning, resonance, and rhythm of this call to practice. In doing so, we have the opportunity to clarify our life and its direction and live it wholeheartedly in this world, as life functioning as wide-awake life together. As our retreat coincides with important days of other traditions, in the Jewish and Christian traditions. We also look to some wholesome teachings within these wisdom traditions, which may illuminate our own understanding and practice. So that's what people who were organizing this retreat thought they were asking you to join in. And whether you knew it or not, that's what we're up to. That sound okay? You still in the right place? Okay. So we have this call to practice, but what's your response to the call? There are forms, which we've begun to speak about. There are these different functions of these forms, which is in the service of freedom, actually. But I have to say something about being here before I go on. I had a dream about a month ago. And when I came, I think the first 2 times I stayed here, right? The 2 visits. Maybe in the rooms where you are, upstairs, one of those rooms. And so it's really something to be here at night. This is a great big old building, you know, and it's kind of like those movies about being at the museum at night, you know, it's kind of like that. Especially if you have to get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom to walk down the hall, you know. Well, the other night I had a dream, and I was in the rooms up there where Marla, there's several rooms. My whole family was there, which just means my mom, my dad, my sister, and I, and we each had our own room. And someone called us to a circle in that hallway, that big hallway up there. And it was dark, and we turned on the light, and we're in the circle. And by the way, my father died on May 1st of 2020, not of COVID, but during, so we're coming up close. He came home on the 4th of April from rehab and was in hospice until his death, the 1st of May. But he's in the circle with us, and one of the funeral home people showed up to bring us ashes, his ashes. And so we're there to receive them in the circle, like we were doing, you know, a while ago. And then there was later a ceremony here in the building for that, except I went to my sister at one point and I said, wait a minute, Dad's here, so whose ashes are these? Mm-hmm. Is he here? Is he dead? And so I think it was a preparation for the question of the great matter. What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to die? What does it mean to love someone who's died? What does it mean to come out of confinement here at Passover? What does it mean to have the threat of death? What does it mean to be crucified? What does it mean to be born again? What does it mean to wake up? What is this thing? All these different traditions, you know, that float together. I like that description that was offered, that we have the opportunity to clarify our life in its direction and live it wholeheartedly in this world as life functioning as wide awake life together. Life functioning as wide awake life. When we engage the forms, those are the support for functioning and expressing ourselves as wide awake life. They support our practice, our path, and our vow. Those are the 3 legs of the stool. We have a practice, we have a path, and a vow. And the Zendo and Buddha Hall forms and the bowing and making offerings and the chanting all support these things. There's a very classical chant that we do in the Soto Zen Liturgy called the Song of the Jewel Mirror Samadhi. It's quite a title, huh? It's a song, it's a poem about samadhi, about awakened state of consciousness, which is like a jeweled mirror. So it's an expression of this wakeful mind, which and I hate to use this metaphor, but it's all I can think of is a disco ball. You know, all these reflections, but it's like a jeweled mirror. Everywhere you look, it's reflecting everything else, like in the net of Indra. And if you want to know from awakened state of mind what wakefulness looks like, it's reflected as this and this and this and that. It's everything around us. It's expressing itself constantly all around us, and we can wake up to this fact. And this poem, or the song, was written by Dongshan in the 9th century. It's a 38th ancestor in the lineage. The 10th generation was Bodhidharma from Shakyamuni Buddha. Dongshan was 38. I'm 92 on the list. It's kind of interesting and humbling and strange. So Dongshan was a very important teacher. And there's a phrase in it that just has always stuck with me. Here's a phrase in the middle of the poem. We won't go through the whole thing. The meaning is not in the words, yet it responds to the inquiring impulse. The meaning of your life, the meaning of this practice, isn't contained in words, yet it responds to the question, to the inquiring impulse. Here's some other translations I liked. 4 others. Its meaning does not abide in the words, yet it meets the inquiring student. So here we are. We have inquiring students, right? Second translation. Depth isn't in words. It comes forward with life. Each moment, life as it is. Third translation. The meaning does not reside in the words, but a pivotal moment brings it forth. Yeah, there are moments for us that turns everything, right? And it could be something dramatic, it could be something ordinary, but suddenly things turn on a dime. And the last translation I found, which I like, the meaning is not in the words, yet it responds to the arrival of energy. Have you arrived? This is quite we could spend the whole retreat just on this line, couldn't we? And we will, in some ways. The questioning student, the pivotal moment, the arrival of energy, the ongoing flow of this impermanent, contingent life energy you call awakening together. So think about it, awakening together, the ongoing flow of contingent life energy, the arrival of vitality and energy, these pivotal moments brought forward by questioning students. This is awakening together, isn't it? And we invite each other to continue. In some ways, I think the forms and the ceremonies and the rituals that we engage in just help us to not go back to sleep. If our intention is to awaken together, these things that keep us awake. So I saw someone a while ago walk in, and then they went back out and walked back in. I think it was Chris, right? Yeah. It's like, oh, I forgot. And that's what it's for. You know the very brief Rumi poem, Don't Go Back to Sleep? Do you know this one? Some of you have heard it before. The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the doorsill where the two worlds touch. People are going back and forth through the door where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep. And in order to support each other, we use our rituals and forms, but also we have stories. And we all require these stories, for our life. And there are certain stories that are important right now. I'm not an expert on the story of Passover. Some of you may have more to say. I look at Ruth right now, but how many of you identify as Jewish? Yeah, great. I'll ask you to help if you want, but I asked one of my students in Austin, if you had to say what's essential about Passover, what would you say? And this is someone who studies Torah and, a lot of things. And this is what he said to me. He sent it to me, wrote it down. To always remember. But then he said, well, there's more. Returning, too. Returning, also. As we do over and over again when we sit. Because he's a Buddhist practitioner, too. He said, returning to where we actually are on the journey. And gratitude, remembering gratitude, that the universe has our backs. As he's talking about the Jewish people out of Egypt, as they walked through the desert, a cloud shielded them from the hot sun. When they needed food or water, it was provided. The generation that left Israel was not the generation that made it to the promised land. Moses was even told early on that he would not make it. Something we were reading the other day, he told me, suggested that one who had been enslaved can never really experience liberation, but maybe their children or students can. So I thought this was very powerful to think about. In our practice, we practice to remember, gratitude, to know that we're supported by all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas throughout space and time, where you can think God has our back, even if things are looking pretty bad. And even if we think, well, in this lifetime we might not be awakened, but our action now sets in motion something so that our children and those who come after us can. And that's essential because we're practicing for the benefit of others, not for ourselves. And that's the Bodhisattva Vow. Some of you have probably noticed that I included a few translations of Psalms, if you've looked at that Norman Fisher, who's a very esteemed Zen teacher and Jewish teacher, who I really like. So I will comment on those throughout as part of our, because I want to really honor this time of Passover. And I thought the Psalms would be a good way to do that. Also, for those of you who grew up in a kind of a Christian background, anyway, I did, a lot of people did. And I grew up in a pretty fundamentalist Christian background in Texas. My grandfather was a Baptist minister, and so forth. So the Jewish people took some pretty big risks, always have, to get out of Dodge, to find where they needed to go. Big risk. And Jesus also took some chances. Think of this, something can be born that is not the union of opposites. Virgin birth. Something can be born, but not because of the union of opposites. Something exists which is non-dual, you might even say divine, and at the same time fully and fallibly human. This is our capacity to wake up in this kind of body. The birth of such energy and the potential of such a perspective terrifies and angers those in power. If you're free, it upsets people who don't want you to be free. Everyone has a place at the table, and the seed of freedom lies within you, and you can come home to yourself. And it's radical and it's dangerous. You hear the story? Nothing deeply and profoundly true ever dies, because that reality is contained by form. It can be expressed and move through form. And each form expresses the essence of all reality, if you have eyes to see and ears to hear. And rebirth is possible here and now, not just on Easter. How's it going? Telling the truth is a tricky thing. Praying and meditating on what is being asked of us is necessary, and then we have to choose to follow life as it is. Because guess what? There's not another choice. You can fight it. You can fight reality and rail against it, but reality is going to win. And you can be betrayed by friends. But goodness and mercy exist even so. And how can that be true? So that's my strange riff on Christianity. How'd that go? I look at CJ. So the Jewish people took big risks and continue to. Jesus took some risks and paid the price for it. Dogen took some risks too. He was orphaned as a little boy. 13th century, he was ordained as a teenager. He was a Tendai monk. He practiced with everything that was around him, and he realized, I don't think this is it. I think there's something more. So he and his teacher, Myozen, got on a ship and crossed the Sea of Japan to China because they thought that the Chan teachers were the real deal, they'd heard. And this was a risky bit in the 13th century. It was not an easy trip. They risked their life to do this. And they met many teachers and ultimately met Rujing, his teacher from whom he received transmissions. So sometimes we're all practicing as best we can and we still feel like something's missing. You ever feel this? Something's missing, even though I'm doing my best. Which Dogen did. Will you go to the ends of the earth to find what your heart longs for? Even at great peril? Through the desert, or to China, or from Austin to Minneapolis on a long day. Because we look for a source. Even if we don't quite know it, most of us are looking for a source that verifies and sustains us so that we can bring it back as a gift for future generations. Certainly for ourselves, but for future generations. So, whether it's the Jewish story or the Christian story, the Jesus story, or the Buddhist story that Dogen is teaching us, do you hear the resonances? It's very interesting. And Dogen, when he got back from China, the first thing that he wrote was the Fukan Zazengi, and you have a copy of that. There are many translations of that title. It means like the universal instructions for the practice of Zazen. It's like, here's your guide. And that's what we're going to really use as our primary source. He wrote it in 1227 initially, and then made many other variations of it are found in the record. In it, he makes the point that there is no true practice that is not an expression of freedom. There is no freedom that is not an expression of practice. And there's no expounding of the Dharma that's not the practice of freedom. Okay, we can go back. There is no practice that is not the expression of freedom. He used the kanji, the Chinese for practice and enlightenment as a compound word. You didn't practice to get enlightened. Practice was the expression of enlightenment. It was practice enlightenment. When you sit in Zazen, when you do your bows, when you bow to each other, when you offer the incense, when you chant, you are calling forward your awaken nature, which is your deepest and most true nature. The meaning is not in the words, yet it responds to the arrival of energy. You have to use ritual and ceremony to call forward that which you think is separate from you and that you're seeking, but actually is the essence of who you are, but which you can come to be intimate with and come to know, and it can flow through you as we engage in these rituals. But not so much if you just kind of do whatever. That's everyday life. Is this making sense? So there is no true practice that is not the expression of freedom or enlightenment. Okay, the second crazy sentence. There is no freedom that is not the expression of practice. If you're awake, you're expressing what practice looks like, because practice isn't something you're doing to get enlightened. And then there's no expounding of the Dharma, what I'm doing, that is not the practice of freedom or enlightenment. So it's this tangle. Just like our karma is tangled, we chanted, this practice and enlightenment are the same thing, but to get that as the embodied inconceivable, one of the translations of the Heart Sutra title is wisdom. Well, it says in the chant, wisdom beyond wisdom, Mahaprajna, wisdom beyond wisdom. This is a wisdom that's beyond wisdom. This isn't wisdom. This is the one that goes beyond wisdom, the inconceivable. And in the description for this practice, it said, what is in practice? What is its motivation? What is its direction? Why should we practice? And what can we offer in this fractured world? So these are questions that we're going to return to over and over as we go through the Fukan Zazengi. It's a great title, isn't it? Just to say it, Fukan Zazengi. But also not just with those words, because it responds to the inquiring impulse. It responds to the arrival of energy. These questions that we're going to return to about what this practice is also through our sitting and walking, coming together and meeting with each other intimately, and our use of ritual and liturgy to take us beyond ourselves. This isn't about self-reflection and self-knowledge. It's about going beyond ourselves to meet these inevitable, necessary, completely unanswerable questions that we are required to come into intimacy with, even if we can't answer them, because the issue isn't about answering. And I think Dogen makes it clear that if you read Dogen a lot, and very few people do, because it takes a strange person to want to do that. But I'm one of them, That Zen is for the rare person who's not looking. It's an important thing. It's for the rare person who's not looking to solve the problem of suffering, so much as to immerse oneself in the universal experience of birth and death, and asking the question, what is this life? That's a different thing than trying to solve it, because you want to get on top of it, And to do this strange and interesting and necessary practice without expecting an answer. It's like, oh, if I do this, then I'll get... But anticipating a path. And the nourishment along the path that keeps us going are the intangible, the ambiguous, the amorphous, the infinite. It's the entire universe supports us and nourishes us. I was just reading, I'm looking around because I have a copy of it here somewhere, the book that some of you have probably read from Zenju, the Shamanic Bones of Zen. It's a new book that's come out. It's very interesting. And I may say more about it later. Here's a small quote. She says, "There's a huge burning fire at the door of Zen, as in every transformative process or practice. It can be turned away from or entered into. And she's a marvelous, marvelous teacher, writer, poet, a black woman of profound depth. There's a huge burning fire at the door of Zen, as in every transformative practice. It can be turned away from or entered into. See, that's the question, isn't it? It will burn all you know of yourself to ashes. Sounds interesting, doesn't it? This can be frightening, since we enter having gone thirsty for peace, looking for water. And what we meet is fire. And I'm going to say a little bit more about this later, about consolation and comfort. And we're going to read the 23rd Psalm too. Mindfulness, which so many of you have trained in, is a wonderful gateway to Zazen. It's a gateway. But in Zazen, there's no checking in with the mind. No witnessing in order to affect some change. Instead, the mind is given an infinitely wide open field in which to meet the entire universe, something larger and more mysterious than we could have imagined. And we'll say more about this. There's a difference between mindfulness practices and Zazen. Zazen is a ceremonial, ritual expression of awakened awareness. Zazen is a ceremony. That's why when you come to your seat, you bow, and you turn and you bow, and you sit in a certain way, and you take a certain posture. It's a ceremony that expresses your innate nature as wakefulness. It's not, I'm now going to do meditation, which is an instrumental activity which will get me something. And this is what the Fukan Zazengi teaches. Blanche, my teacher, loved the Fukan Zazengi. It was one of her favorites. And asked us to chant it a lot. We chanted it many mornings. And it's pretty long. You know, you read it? It's not like a paragraph. And the part about how to sit Zazen is incredibly boring and repetitive. The part that just says what to do. And I say that for a reason, because it's the chanting, not the content, which is the ritual enactment. Forget about what it means. The meaning's not in the words, but it responds to the arrival of the energy, it responds to the inquiring student. It's the chanting, it's the offering yourself over to the ritual enactment. And we're going to chant it some as a way to honor our ancestors, especially in this case, Zenke, Roshi, Blanche, and engage the ritual chanting itself. And at your posture, tending to your cushion or your chair, your bowing, arranging of robes if you have them, and our mudra, they aren't, well, part of it's preparation, but it's not just preparation, it's the enactment of the mystery from the very beginning. It's not like, now I'm going to get ready and do like the real thing. It's always the real thing. You're never outside of it. And I'm going to be guiding and coaching as a way to care for you as we engage the rituals. Because I think this is a way to shift the forms and rituals from potentially, oppressive and hierarchical things to the ritual of ceremonial care. That's really what we're doing. So how are you doing? You doing okay? Okay, I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to read something to you from my journal. So it's going to have a little different voice than just talking to you like this. And it's not It's like a couple of pages maybe. I don't know, maybe not that long. But see, I talked about or referred to the Jewish story, I talked to the Jesus story, I talked about Dogen's story. So here's see if this is part of a story that resonates with you, okay? Or maybe not. But it'll help you know some of where I'm coming from. The very first time I visited a Zen temple, I foolishly signed up for a full day of formal sitting. I was determined to sit in a real zendo with real monks and hear a real talk from a real Zen teacher. So I arranged to travel from Texas to California to Green Gulch Zen Farm just north of San Francisco. Anybody been there? Green Gulch? It's spectacularly beautiful and right on the coast and hideously cold. I had not had an opportunity for any personal instruction before arriving and had absolutely no experience in Zen forms. I actually had very little formal meditation experience, but I'd been reading my Buddhist books and sitting at home for years, preparing for my plunge into the world of Zen training. I was sure I would be able to manage just fine. I was quite determined and earnest, also younger, even though I didn't really know what I was getting into. The entire day was shockingly unpleasant. I had chosen to arrive the evening before the retreat, so they asked that I sleep in the zendo, in the meditation hall. I wanted to be present and ready for my special day of serene meditation. Of course, I hardly slept, so I was tired and a bit disoriented when the wake-up bell rang well before dawn. It was unbelievably cold. I was anxious, tense, sleepy, confused, and in physical pain most of the day. I was mesmerized by all the formality around me, and I was swept along in a kind of trance in this new, foreign world. A good friend came to retrieve me at the end of the day, and we drove up out of the valley mist and the eucalyptus fragrance of Green Dragon Temple through Sausalito and back towards San Francisco. We moved through the traffic of the city and then south towards Big Sur along one of the most beautiful stretches of coastal highway in the world. I hardly remember that drive. I was in a state of shock from the day that had unfolded as a powerful, difficult, and painful surprise. And the biggest surprise of all, it didn't take me long to begin to make plans to return. So I asked myself, why was I choosing to continue with this difficult and seemingly foreign practice? There was very little on the surface of what I had experienced that day in the zendo that matched anything I had hoped to experience in meditation. Why would anyone choose to do such a thing, let alone continue once they realized even a little of the challenge involved? This was confusing. How was I to understand this mysterious impulse to voluntarily give up hours and days of my brief and busy life in order to sit in stillness and silence, facing the relentless tumult of my busy mind and troubled heart, battered by waves of sleepiness and discomfort in my body? This just seemed like self-punishing religion. And I had more than my share of that growing up in a fundamentalist Christian family. The broader question was, what does get us back on the meditation cushion or into our seat in the meditation hall in the first place? What keeps us coming back? Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, the founding priest and teacher at the San Francisco Zen Center, used an interesting and poetic phrase to describe this call. In his very traditional kind of Zen-like comment from a talk, he spoke of our inmost request. That great phrase is in our inmost request of our true nature. Here's his words. The mystery of why we pursue truth in the spiritual world or physical pleasure in the material world should be understood as the vital request of our true nature. Practice vitalized, made vital by our inmost request is self-joyous practice. Only when we find ourselves actualizing this freedom by practice do we find the incessant shedding forth of Buddha light in our life. So I'll read it again. The mystery of why we pursue truth in the spiritual world or physical pleasure in the material world should be understood as the vital request of our true nature. Practice vitalized by our inmost request is self-joyous practice. Only when we find ourselves actualizing this freedom by practice do we find the incessant shedding forth of Buddha light in our life. Now, the Zen practice I'd conjured into a fantasied pursuit had revealed itself to me as something far more powerful and challenging than I'd anticipated. However, it was a relief to think that maybe whatever I was following, beyond my fantasy, was actually an expression of my true nature, as noted in Suzuki Roshi's statement. That was my hope, at least. And it appeared that this was the promise of the teachings I was encountering. But what would this self-joyous practice, what was this self-joyous practice that he referred to? I certainly had not stumbled upon anything in formal practice that seemed joyous. And how was this difficult practice going to call forward this esoteric-sounding, incessant shedding forth of Buddha light in my dim and humble life? It appeared that this was going to be a practice that revealed deep questions more often than it offered clear answers. I was discovering that these were the kinds of questions that came and grabbed me and would not let me go. I remember asking my primary psychological mentor and great teacher, John Gladfelter, about such questions, and he said, "These are such good questions, it would be a shame to answer them." At first, I didn't understand what he meant. But as I stepped onto the Zen path, I was beginning to find my way into a useful and more generous response. To answer these deep questions in some final way, these requests that emerged from so deep within, would be a shame. Apparently, I was to stay close to the questions, to become intimate with them, to let them slowly reveal themselves to me, and to never let them go, because they didn't let me go. The real question was not how to answer them, but how to hold them appropriately so they could show me the way. And that's been about the last 30 years of my practice. But what I was looking for was something more like consolation or comfort or contentment, right? That's what we want. And these kind of words, consolation, comfort, contentment, they don't really show up in Zen that much. We think of it more as confrontational sometimes. In fact, being attached to comfort is often named specifically as a barrier to meeting life as it is. And contentment is sometimes seen as a description of waning commitment or vitality. Yet, we all long to feel consoled by someone we trust, to be comforted in, their warm embrace, to rest in the contentment of safe harbor. These are human and wholesome longings of the heart. And the freedom that emerges through Zen practice does open us to these universal peace-filled qualities. If this wasn't the case, I'm not sure how I could have continued. It really is what happens. And as I was reflecting on these kind of paradoxical things and the painful longings, I did happen upon Norman Fisher's translation of the Psalms. And he, rather than using the word God, he used the word you. In fact, the name of the book of his collection is called Opening to You. Opening to You. Norman's version of the 23rd Psalm. You are my shepherd, I'm content. You lead me to rest in the sweet grasses, to lie down by the quiet waters, and I'm refreshed. You lead me down the right path, the path that unwinds in the pattern of your name. And even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are with me, comforting me with your rod and your staff, showing me each step. You prepare a table for me in the midst of my adversity and moisten my head with oil. Surely my cup is overflowing, and goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life. And in the long days beyond, I will always live in your house. I don't know why it's so touching to read it now. You read it? You have it there?
It's the salmon colored.
Yes, please. What if we were reading this to each other? What if we were reading this to each other? You know, it's interesting. Make it personal. Because it's not about me, it's not about you, but it's something between us.
You are my shepherd. I am content. You lead me to rest in the green grasses, to lie down by the quiet waters, and I am refreshed. You lead me down the right path, the path that unwinds in the pattern of your name. And even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are with me, comforting me with your rod and your staff, showing me each step. You prepare a table for me in the midst of my adversity, and moisten my head with oil. Surely my cup is overflowing, and goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and in the long days beyond, I will always live in your house.
What's it feel like to read it?
Beautiful.
But the enactment brings it forth, doesn't it? It's different than listening. Like I could barely get through it, but I don't know why. It doesn't matter why. You know, the dictionary tells us that consolation is to offer comfort to someone in distress. And spiritual friendship is a powerful source of consolation. But a kind of consolation that doesn't say, everything's going to be okay. Instead, it's a consolation that suggests everything will be completely what it will be. And we will be okay together. I will be with you, and you will be with me as we meet what comes with care. And it says in the dictionary, contentment is a state of peaceful happiness, not wishing for more. Softening our, continual grasping for more is at the core of Buddhist practice, certainly. But contentment is not just refusing what we want, it's more of a positive embrace of what's possible. Contentment. I will be okay no matter what. I'll not abandon myself, and I won't abandon you. I'm content knowing that I will take care of myself no matter what. It's a different kind of contentment. And then comfort, that third word, to ease distress or suffering. And this is the very heart of the Buddhist teaching and practice. Understanding suffering and easing the distress of unnecessary suffering. Suffering is the primary fruit of practice, I think. But to be free of distress, moments when we're free of distress and any unnecessary suffering, I think you would call it a nirvanic moment. People talk about achieving nirvana. I think nirvanic moments is as good as it gets. When we're free from the constraints of our conditioning, even for a moment. Not caught in the reactivity shaped by our conditioning, even temporarily. Then we're free. And the deepest understanding of this freedom tells us, I'm never apart from you. So who is this I that's always on our side, or this you that doesn't abandon us? Big mind, Buddha nature, boundlessness, universal consciousness, God, it all fit the response to this request. So, investigate your own longing. Share your vulnerable longings with those that you trust. Listen deeply with respect to the longings of others. Offer consolation and comfort to others and realize the deep contentment that opens on its own when you and a friend really meet. And discover the path that unwinds as we open to each other. Remember the line? Which I think is so beautiful. The path that unwinds in the pattern of your name. Discover the path that unwinds as we open to each other. Which is what the psalm is telling us. We are the shepherds, and I'm content to sit in this circle. You lead me to rest in this room, to lie down, to sit down in the stillness that your silence offers, and I'm refreshed. You lead me down the right path, the Eightfold Path, right wisdom, right understanding, that unwinds in the pattern of this. And even though I will walk through the valley of the shadow of death, the great matter, birth and death, in the Heart Sutra it said, you're without the mind that's awake is without fear. The 23rd Psalm in its King James Version is the first thing I memorized when I was a little boy in Sunday school. And my dad took me to his class, because I was like 5 years old, he was so proud of me because I could repeat it. And I said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no eagles. But to a 5-year-old boy, that made sense, right? For you're with me. You're with me. And I'm with you. Comforting me with your rod and staff. Of course, there's a cultural reference there to a shepherd. Showing me each step. And preparing a table. That's what we're doing today. Preparing the table in the midst of our adversity. we're not going to do the wisdom water as a very esoteric thing we do in Buddhism, or anointing our head with oil, but just by being here, my cup is overflowing. How about you? And goodness and kindness will follow me. You can't get away. You can try. Even though other things dog you too, that's true. And in the long days beyond, even my own life, whatever this is, will live in that same place. My sister is an artist. She does primarily collage right now. And she made that collage of broken bits of things which came together to make the flag of the Ukraine. And she was showing it to me, and I said, when I come to Austin, can I actually take the original with me to these retreats? So we can have it there. So I hope that you appreciate it. Some people wanted to copy it and just print it out, so they could make a small copy for their altar. And I said, well, to Kathy, I said, it's your piece of art. Is it okay if people do that? And she said, I made it to honor the brave people of Ukraine. Of course they can copy it. It should be on every altar. But all of us are broken. All of us have difficulties. All of us are challenged. Some of us were in Egypt. Some of us had to get out. Terrible things happened, and they still do. And yet it comes together to make a pattern that leads us somewhere, just like these forms do. And I think we're at the end of our time for our Dharma talk. And we'll have a bit of time maybe to connect.
Yeah. No, I think this Dharma activity period this morning is still for you to make use of as you see fit. So it could be a little more Q&A.
I think that it's better to have some time for you two to connect with each other, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, well, we can.
So can you make breakout groups for the people online? And I'm not sure how many they are, but maybe groups of like 3, just like nice small groups. And if you want, maybe we could just make it simple for right now. Maybe like you 3 right there, did you make a little connection? And then you 3, and you 3, and then you 3, or let's say you 3, I'm going to hold you, and then there's 3 there, and there's 3 there, and those 2, you can tolerate them, right? Okay, good. And what I'd like for you to do, this is your instruction. Oh, I can't close that. And those of you online, just take a moment to just take each other in, like sit quietly for a moment. I don't know how you feel about this because of the COVID deal, but what the heck, we're here, My longing would be, as you meet your people in your group, just take each other's hands for a minute, one at a time, and look at each other. So you feel the person's body, and you look at them before you say anything. And then give each other a little time just to speak from wherever you are, not necessarily just conversation, but what's arriving with all of this? Where are you? This question about why am I here? What is practice? What is this? So we can help each other really arrive and be seen and be heard, and doesn't have to go anywhere to solve anything. Just connect. And then there'll be a little sound at the end to let you know it's time to come back into the circle this way. Does that seem okay?
How much time?
We have 25 minutes, I think. No, let me see. No, let's do 30 minutes, which is what it was set for, but it'll just be a little past on the, you got that? Starting now.